Solange the Wolf Girl by Marcel Prévost. All that afternoon we had walked through the forest, stick in hand, our bags slung over our shoulders, through that magnificent forest of 𝒕𝒐𝒓𝒚, which covers one half of the Saint-Amand country and one half of Nevers. The little village of 𝒕𝒐𝒓𝒚, squatting on the bank of the Cher in the rent of the valley which cuts through the center of the forest, was our last halting place for the day. We dined with an old friend, the modest doctor of 5 or 6 neighboring communes, and after dinner we sat musing on the stoop, with our cherry pipes between our lips. The shadows fell around us over the dense blue mass of forest that encircled the horizon, with all the solemn slowness of night in June. The sky was streaked with flights of swallows. The 9 o'clock Angelus scattered its notes with intervals of silence from the height of the snuffer-like steeple which emerged from among the roofs. From distant farms came the barking of dogs, calling and answering one another. A woman, still young, in a red woolen skirt and a white linen shirt, came out of the house nearby and walked down toward the river. With her left arm she pressed a baby against her bosom. A little boy held her other hand and gave his in turn to a still smaller brother. When they reached the bank of the Cher, the young woman sat upon a great stone, and while the 2 boys, hastily undressed, were paddling and splashing about like little ducks in the stream, she nursed her last-born. One of our party, who was a painter, said, "There is a picture that would be popular at the Salon. How splendidly built and well lighted that woman is, and what a pretty bright spot that red skirt forms in the blue landscape." A voice behind us called out, "The girl you see there, young men, is Solange, the wolf girl." And our host, who had been detained by a consultation, came out to join us. As we asked him who was this wolf girl and how she came by so strange a nickname, he told us this story. This Solange the wolf girl, whose real name is Solange Tournier, wife of Griet, was the prettiest girl in the whole 𝒕𝒐𝒓𝒚 country about 10 years ago. Now, of course, working in the fields as she does and having had 5 children, she looks hardened and worn. Still, considering her 30 years, she is handsome enough, as you see. At the time of the adventure whence she derived her strange nickname, she was living with her parents, who were farmers of the 𝒕𝒐𝒓𝒚, some 15 kilometers from here. Although very poor, she was much sought by all the boys, even by the well-to-do, but she accepted the addresses of only one, a certain Laurent Griet, on whom she had set her heart when she was a wee bit of a girl, when the 2 kept the sheep together in the neighborhood of 𝒕𝒐𝒓𝒚. Laurent Griet was a foundling who had nothing in the world but his 2 arms for a fortune. Solange's parents felt no inclination to add poverty to poverty, especially as the girl had so many wealthy suitors. So Solange was forbidden to see her friend. Naturally, the girl never failed at a tryst. Living in the same commune with the forest at hand, they never lost an opportunity of meeting there. When the father and mother Tournier realized that scoldings and blows were of no avail, they determined upon a radical step. Solange was accordingly sent out to work at 𝒕𝒐𝒓𝒚 on the model farm of Monsieur Roger Duflot, our deputy. Perhaps you think our 2 lovers ceased to see each other. Not in the least. Now they met at night. They slept no more. After nightfall, they both left the farms where they were employed and started toward each other. And then they remained together till nearly dawn in the maternal forest, the accomplice of their young love. This was in 1879. In this manner, the summer and autumn went by. Then came the winter, and a fierce winter it was. The Cher carried ice drifts and finally froze from bank to bank. The 𝒕𝒐𝒓𝒚's forests, covered with snow, were bent like the weak supports of an overladen roof. The roads were almost impassable. The forest, deserted by man, was gradually being reconquered by beasts. It was soon invaded by wolves, which had neither been seen nor heard of since the terrible year. Yes, sir, wolves. They haunted the isolated farms around Lurcy, Lévis, and 𝒕𝒐𝒓𝒚. They even ventured into the streets of Saint-Bonnet-le-Désert, a little village in the heart of the forest on the banks of a pond. It reached such a point that men were organized into bands to beat the woods. A reward of 50 francs was offered for the head of a wolf. Neither winter nor wolves, however, daunted Solange and Laurent, or interfered with their nocturnal meetings. They continued their expeditions in the face of 1,000 dangers. This was the dead season in the fields, the time when the land lies fallow. Every night, Laurent left 𝑺𝒕𝒐𝒓𝒚 a gun over his shoulder and penetrated with a lively step into the black and white forest. Solange, on the other hand, started from 𝑺𝒕𝒐 at about 9 o'clock, and they met near a glade some 3 kilometers from here, traversed by a road and known as the Découverte. It so happened one night, which, by the way, was Christmas Eve, Laurent Griet, as he reached the rendezvous, slipped on the hardened snow and fell, breaking his right leg and spraining his right wrist. Solange tried to raise him, but could only drag him to a great elm, against which she propped him after wrapping him in her own cloak. "Wait for me here, my poor Laurent," said she. "I will run to 𝑺𝒕𝒐 for the doctor and get him to come to you in his carryall." She started off, but had not reached the first turn in the road when she heard a report and the cry, "Help!" She ran back and found her friend in an agony of pain and fear, his trembling hand on the gun which lay beside him. She said, "What is it, Laurent? Was it you who fired?" He answered, "It was I. I saw a beast about the size of a large dog and with great red eyes. I believe on my word it was a wolf." "Was it at him you fired?" "No, I cannot lift my gun on account of my arm. I fired on the ground to scare him. He has gone now." Solange reflected for a moment. "Will he come back?" "I am afraid he will," answered the lad. "Solange, you will have to stay, or the beast will eat me." "Well," she said, "I will stay. Let me have the gun." She took it, put in a fresh cartridge, and they both waited. An hour passed. The moon, as yet invisible, had risen, however, above the horizon, for the zenith reflected a confused light, which was gradually growing more intense. Laurent felt the fever coming upon him. He shivered and moaned. Solange, half frozen, as she stood leaning against the tree, was beginning to feel drowsy. Suddenly a bark, a sort of howl like that of a dog at night when it is tied, made her start. In the faint light she saw 2 red eyes fixed upon her. It was the wolf. Laurent tried to rise and take his gun, but the pain flung him back with a cry. "Load, Solange," said he. "Do not fire too soon, and aim between the eyes." She shouldered, aimed, and fired, but the gun recoiled and missed aim. The beast was untouched. It ran off a short way down the road. Then it was heard howling at a distance, and other howls came in answer. The moon was climbing the sky. It suddenly passed the dark mass of the thickets and flooded the entire forest, as the footlights illumined the scenery on the stage. Then Solange and Laurent saw this horrible sight. At a few feet from them, 5 wolves were seated on their haunches, drawn in line across the road, while another, bolder than the rest, was walking slowly towards them. "Listen," said Laurent, "aim at that one that is coming. If you bring him down, the others will eat him, and they will leave us in peace in the meantime." The wolf continued to advance with short, cautious steps. They could now see his bloodshot eyeballs distinctly, the protruding rings of his spine, the sharp bones of his carcass, his dull hair, and his open jaw, with the long tongue hanging out. "Hold the butt end well in the hollow of your shoulder. Now, fire!" There was a report. The beast leaped to one side and fell dead without a groan. The whole band galloped off and disappeared in the copse. "Run, Solange!" cried Laurent. "Drag him as far as you can along the road. There is no danger. The others will not come back for a while yet." She had started when he called her back. "It might be just as well to cut off the beast's head on account of the reward." "Have you a knife?" asked Solange. "Yes, in my belt." It was a short-handled, broad-bladed hunter's knife. She took it and ran to the dead wolf. She made a great effort and drove it in his throat, the warm blood trickling down her hands and along her skirt. She turned her knife around, cut deep, and then hacked and finally severed the head from the trunk, which she dragged by one leg over the slippery snow as far as she could. Then she returned to her lover with the bloody, bristly head of the beast in her hand. What Laurent had foreseen occurred. The wolves, at first frightened by the death of their leader, were soon brought back by the smell of the blood. In the white light of the moon, reflected by the snow like the fantastic light of a fairy scene, the 2 young people saw the group of lean, ravenous beasts rubbing their backs against one another, crowding around the fresh prey, tearing it limb from limb, growling and snarling over it, wrenching off the flesh till nothing was left of it, not even a tuft of hair. Meanwhile, the boy was suffering greatly from his injuries. Solange, whose nerves were beginning to relax, struggled vainly against exhaustion and sleep. Twice her gun fell from her hands. The wolves, having finished their meal, began to draw nearer. The girl fired twice in the lot, but her benumbed fingers trembled and she missed her aim. At each report, the band turned tail, trotted about 100 meters down the road, waited a moment, and came back. Then the two poor children were convinced that it was all over with them and that they must die. Solange dropped her gun. It never once occurred to her that she might save herself. She threw herself down beside her lover, clasped her arms around him, laid her cheek against his, and there, under the same cloak, they awaited death, half frozen with the cold, half burning with fever. Their confused brains conjured strange visions. Now they thought they had gone back to the balmy nights of June, when the forest, clad in deep green, sheltered their peaceful meetings. Then suddenly the wood was bare, lighted with a weird, snowy light, peopled with shifting forms, eyes like burning embers, great open jaws that multiplied and came nearer, ever nearer. But neither Solange nor Laurent was destined to die so horrible a death. Providence, yes, young men, I believe in a providence, had decreed that I, on that Christmas morning, should find myself on that particular road on my way home in my carryall from Saint-Bonnet-le-Désert. I managed the lines, my man held the gun and inspected the road. No doubt our sleigh bells frightened away the wolves, for we saw none. As we drove near the elm at the foot of which the lovers lay, my mare shied, and so drew our attention to them. I jumped down from the seat. My man and I settled them in the carryall as best we could, covering them with what wraps we had along. They were unconscious and almost frozen. We took the bloody head of the wolf with us too. It was about 7 o'clock in the morning when we reached 𝑺𝒕𝒐𝒓𝒚. The day was breaking over a landscape of spun glass and white velvet. Monsieur Roger Duflot's farmers and at least one half of the inhabitants of the borough, having heard of Solange's disappearance, came out to meet us, and in the very kitchen where we dined this evening, in front of a great fire of crackling heather, Laurent and his friend warmed themselves and told us the story of their terrible Christmas. One of us said, "And what followed, doctor? Did they marry?" "Yes, they were married," answered our host. "The will of Providence is sometimes so plainly indicated by events that the most obtuse cannot fail to perceive it. After the adventure with the wolves, Solange's parents consented to her marriage with Laurent Griet. The marriage took place in the spring. The reward of 50 francs for the wolf's head paid for the wedding dress." The doctor was silent. Night fell upon us. The sky of a turquoise blue reflected its first stars in the river. The mass of forest, dense and inky, shut off the horizon. We saw Solange, the wolf girl, dress her 2 boys and start homeward with them, the youngest asleep on her shoulder. She passed very near us and, looking up, smiled at the doctor. The doctor said, "Good night, Solange." The end.